Well, hello. I'm back after 5 excellent weeks away with friends and family in the US and ready to dive back into John. I actually think that was probably a really good spot to pause and take a breath because we are coming to two of the most intense chapters in the Bible which recount Jesus' arrest and trial and execution. And honestly, I would prefer to look away. But John says, no, you must look. And you will be amazed by Jesus' courage and determination and love and glory. Because what we've actually come to, I think, is a showdown in a war that has loomed right from the start when Satan came into the garden and lied to humans and confined them to sin and death and exile. And Jesus said earlier, the ruler of this world is coming. Satan is coming, and sure enough, here comes the combined armed forces of the religious authorities and a really large Roman contingent as well, Judas the ringleader out the front. And John told us that Satan entered Judas, and he's the one pulling the strings. And Jesus told these religious rulers earlier their father was Satan. So you can see it's a confrontation on a cosmic scale. Well, who wields the power here? Well, is it the ringleader Judas out the front? Or is it the religious rulers and their well-armed troops backing them up? It can hardly be the disciples because they're about to scatter terrified, though apparently some have brought swords. John makes it really clear in the details which he selects here that the ultimate power lies with Jesus. He is in full control. So the question is, why does he submit himself and surrender to these forces? How is this humiliation going to lead to his victory? Well, let's take a closer look at what John wants to show us. Now, you recall that Jesus had spent the last few hours teaching his disciples everything they needed to know to face the next chapter, and they may actually have set out from the upper room as he was still speaking. And then in chapter 18 it says, after Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So it's late at night, very dark, not just literally dark, and it's actually a short walk down from the Temple Mount across the creek of the Kidron Brook to the very familiar Mount of Olives just across the way where Jesus had taught so often. And they come into this olive orchard or this garden where Jesus and the disciples, including Judas of course, had spent so many precious times. And he's not going there to hide. He's going where he's going to be expected to turn up, especially by Judas. Jesus heads there full of purpose. He knows the place, he knows the hour. He's heeding his Father's will. Now, John does not tell us every detail. The other Gospels fill in the other things that happened on that night. But normally this garden, we can imagine, was a place of fellowship and learning and probably laughter. And we get some other details about the night from, as I said, the other Gospel writers. And I'm going to, in particular, pull out some of Luke's account to fill out what happened here. Now, Luke tells us in chapter 22 that when he reached the place, Jesus said to the disciples, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours." And it says, an angel from heaven appeared to him, gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he got up from the prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray, that you may not come into this time of trial." Needless to say, the mood here is very somber and very tense. But John selects different details from the things he witnessed that night. He omits describing Jesus' anguish and prayer here and the disciples sleeping, but what he adds is information about the formidable nature of these arresting forces. He says, "So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. And John actually uses a technical term which suggests that there may actually have been up to 500 men there if the whole battalion had been sent out. Now, we know that at the time of the Passover, extra detachments of Roman soldiers were sent to Jerusalem to try and keep the peace during the festival, probably authorised by the governor Pilate. And the intention here is to nip any unruly rebel forces in the bud. And it's interesting to see Judas out the front there in his role as instigator. He seems to almost be coordinating this whole move against his former friend and master, no doubt with the backing of the Pharisees and Sadducees. John wants us to see the significant show of force here. The disciples would have been absolutely overwhelmed by the sight of their approach. And it's clear that they're expecting trouble. They've got lanterns to find where he's hiding. They've got weapons and ropes to overpower and restrain him if he fought back. It's ludicrous. We know who they're dealing with, don't we? Jesus had said in chapter 10, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord, and I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again." And in chapter 14, he said, "Yes, the ruler of this world is coming, but he has no power over me." Jesus has boundless power. So when he's confronted by these forces, what does he do? Well, it's a bit weird, because he seems to surrender, but at the same time, he seems to be in total control. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Well, the high priest, the Roman centurions, and maybe Judas too, are clearly anxious and uncertain about how these events might pan out. Now, we know they've chosen darkness to avoid the crowds who seem to adore this Jesus zealot character, and maybe things could get out of hand. But compare that with Jesus. He has full knowledge of what is about to transpire. He knows ahead of time just how everything's going to pan out, including every detail of the suffering he's going to experience. So what does he do? He steps forward. He doesn't back away from these foes. He strides towards them. He's fearless. And you can see it's him who gets things rolling. He's the first to ask a question, and he puts them on the back foot. And their answer is kind of feeble. It's that as low a comment as you can make. He says, "That fellow, that Jesus the Nazarene, that nobody," is the implication. And it's a dazzling response to their use of this diminutive form of his name. Jesus replied, "I am." And Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And when Jesus said to them, "I am," they retreated a step and fell to the ground. It's like a lion roaring in response to someone saying, "Nice kitty." And in this description, John wants us to see the divine power that he is displaying here. Jesus says, "Ego eimi, I am." And look, it's ambiguous in the Greek. It could just mean, yeah, that's me. But it's also the Greek translation of the Hebrew name of God, which he revealed to Moses, "I am who I am." And I reckon it's clear from the reaction just how these guys have heard it. They fall back speechless in his presence. It's like God himself has spoken to them. Well, I guess he had. And maybe not for the first time either for some of them, because in John 7, we're told that the rulers sent the temple police to go and arrest Jesus in this earlier attempt. And when they get back, they ask them, "Why didn't you arrest him?" And the police reply, "No one has ever spoken like this." And I wonder if some of those temple police are here again. And then Jesus, of course, can keep teaching in the temple. And what he says there is, "Before Abraham was, I am." And on that occasion, they can see immediately what he's claiming, and they try to stone him to death. And now, here in the dark, this unarmed man who says, "I am," the words seem to terrify them. And John wants us to take note. And there is Judas. You'll notice he's aligned himself with the anti-God forces of the world. Perhaps he's feeling he's backing the stronger side, perhaps the right side. Maybe he's feeling pretty powerful, flexing in front of his old deluded pals and their crazy leader. He thinks, I'll put a stop to this nonsense. Luke also told us in his account of the Last Supper that this happened. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12, and then he went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers of the temple police about how he might betray him to them. And they were greatly pleased and agreed to give him money. So he consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus to them when no crowd was present. And Luke also tells us that at some point here during the arrest, Judas steps forward in an act of complete duplicity. We're told here suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man? Now, this is not in John's account, but it fits in somewhere with what happened. If he said it before Jesus' I am statement, maybe at that point he too falls backward and thinks, oops. But if he says it afterwards, which is also possible, maybe he's saying to the guys around him, come on, look, he does this kind of thing. Pull yourself together. Don't be fooled by him. But John leaves Judas out here. He is much more interested in this command and power that Jesus displayed. And he goes on and says, again, Jesus asked them, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I told you that I am. So if you are looking for me, let these people go. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me. So the crowd seems a little bit frozen at this point, and it's actually Jesus who has to get the ball rolling again. You might recall that in his prayer, Jesus asked the Father to protect the disciples, just as he'd been doing. And we saw there that that didn't necessarily mean protection from harm and danger, but the strength and endurance to press on in faith. But here it would seem that Jesus is indeed protecting them from the risk of being caught up and arrested and executed as his followers. For now, anyway. I think what John is highlighting is that in this battle between the enemy forces of Satan versus the Son of God, there's actually only one who can and will take them on. It's going to be a solo battle. Jesus alone is going to bear the brunt of their hate. It's he alone who will experience the force of God's judgment. He does it for the sheep he loves to protect them. And he says to these powerful enemy forces, as Moses had said to Pharaoh in the Old Testament, let my people go. But our friend Peter wants to play his part, and so this happens. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back in its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me? There's this weird parallel actually here between Peter and Judas. They actually both want to stop the mission of Jesus. And they both are resorting to human powers to achieve their ends. But of course their motives are so different, as are the outcomes of their lives, because Peter actually loves Jesus. And I imagine he's probably still stinging from the rebuke earlier that evening when Peter had offered to lay down his life for you, and Jesus says, will you lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the cock crows, you'll have denied me 3 times. Is Peter trying to prove Jesus wrong about him? He also really wants to play a role. And it's clear he does not understand the necessity of Christ's suffering. In Mark, we're told in chapter 8 that when Jesus was teaching them, he told them clearly the Son of Man must undergo great sufferings and be rejected and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And Peter takes him aside, began to rebuke him, but turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And here we see Peter still thinking from below. He can fight and stop this terrible thing from happening, perhaps. Now, the other Gospels record Jesus saying, "Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me." What is this cup? Well, it's the cup of God's wrath, which Ezekiel calls the cup of horror and desolation. God's judgment poured out on his enemies and on the wicked. John leaves that prayer out, but in these words here to Peter, he makes it really clear Jesus is determined to drink that cup. Now we'll flick over here to Luke's account again to fill in a bit more of the story, because Luke tells us this. Jesus says to Peter at this point, "No more of this," and he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple police and the elders who'd come for him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as though I were a rebel? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." It's interesting that John omits that detail of the healing. Later he tells us that in fact what he's done is he's made quite a deliberate selection, omitting and selecting different things. And he doesn't tell us everything. Don't be dismayed by these apparent differences, because I think when you put it all side by side, it just fleshes the event out. You'll just see that John's focus is elsewhere. And I'm really not sure why he leaves out the detail of Jesus' healing Malchus, especially as he knows the name of this servant of the high priest, and he actually knows the high priest too personally, through some connection. I wonder if perhaps the story of Malchus was well known enough in the early church. It is the last of Jesus' miraculous healings, and maybe it led Malchus to faith. Either way, what John wants to draw our attention to, though, is that having displayed his power and his command in this situation, his authority, he then allows the troops to arrest him. It says, so the soldiers, their officers, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. And this can only happen because he chooses to submit himself. I think this moment is pivotal. This really is the start of him submitting himself to humiliation and death. It must have been so hard to watch. It's actually still really hard to contemplate. But John does not want you to look away too quickly, because this is how Jesus shows his love and his glory, how he keeps us safe from the powers of evil and darkness, from Satan's murderous schemes. He's stepping in on our behalf. But look, this long night of suffering has just begun. I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue to observe, in awe and gratitude, the journey of our Saviour to the cross.
They bound the hands of Jesus in the garden where he prayed. They led him through the streets in shame. They spat upon the Savior, so pure and free from sin. They said, crucify him, he's to blame. He could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him